Hello, and welcome to Building Language Access Literacy. 5. Who provides language access services? Once an organization knows that there is a need for language access services and what the languages of those services are, they need to determine who will provide them. There are some common misconceptions when thinking about interpretation and translation services. First, a bilingual person is not automatically a qualified interpreter or translator. The ability to provide interpretation and translation services in an effective, efficient, and responsible manner requires continuous education, training, and experience. Second, translation and interpretation are not interchangeable professions, but rather two separate skill sets. A person who has learned one of those skills has not necessarily learned the other. In fact, professionals are often either translators or interpreters and not both, although there are some people who practice both professions. Remember, translators read a document in one language and then write it in another, while interpreters listen in one language and relay the message in another. Third, some people incorrectly believe that high-quality translation is available fast, easy, and cheap, because automatic machine translations can happen with the click of a button. It is very important to remember that translations produced automatically by a machine are not reliable. To deliver a reliable translation, organizations need to involve trained translators. While a translator might sometimes use computer tools that they have been trained to use responsibly, we should not use automatic machine translation that has not been professionally reviewed in a professional setting. So, who are the translators and interpreters that organizations should be using to provide their language access services? Translators and interpreters should be qualified, meaning that they have received appropriate training, they are experienced, and they continue to develop their skill set. Since translators need to be able to read, write, research, and use technology effectively, they are also often expected to have 4-year university degrees. If an organization is unsure about an individual's translation skills, they can ask them to translate a short document and have the translation evaluated by a third party. Qualified interpreters might hold a certificate depending on the availability of certification in their language pair or pairs. If an organization is not sure about an interpreter's ability, they could have a qualified third party review a brief interpreting test run. If there is a very high demand for translation and interpretation into one particular language, an organization could consider hiring full-time or part-time translators and interpreters as employees. Employees of an organization who provide language access services are often referred to as in-house translators or interpreters. One advantage of in-house translators and interpreters is that they get to know the organization, and they might also be able to help with the management of language access services. Organizations also rely on vendors or contracted translators and interpreters to help meet their language access service needs. This can mean hiring a large language access service provider or agency that provides both services in many languages, or partnering with several small businesses or individual professionals to provide the services for specific languages. Language service fees are typically based on the length, complexity, and timeline of a given document or project, and the number of hours spent per assignment, but costs can also vary depending on the rarity of the language pair needed. Organizations often rely on their own bilingual employees with other roles to provide language access services. For example, a bilingual outreach coordinator might be asked to translate forms or interpret for clients during appointments. If an organization wants its own bilingual employees to perform language access services in addition to their usual duties, they should think about this approach methodically. First, leadership will need to determine which, if any, of their employees are willing to provide those services in addition to performing their existing duties. If so, the organization should ensure that they can adequately compensate the employees for the provision of language access services and clearly lay out how this compensation will work. The organization should also pay careful attention to how employees will balance the provision of language access services with other responsibilities. For instance, if an employee who is qualified to provide Spanish interpretation is constantly being pulled from their desk, will they be able to perform the other parts of their job? It's also very important to determine whether bilingual employees actually have the language skills and training that will make them a qualified interpreter or translator. Even if someone is willing to provide language access services and self-identifies as bilingual, this doesn't necessarily mean they are capable of providing language access services in a professional setting. This can be especially true in settings where specialized language is common, such as in medical or legal offices. In an encounter with an interpreter, the goal is to achieve communicative autonomy. Communicative autonomy means that each party is responsible for and in control of their own communication. But if the person serving as interpreter is not qualified, despite their good intentions, that goal might not be achieved. This can lead to a stressful situation for the bilingual employee, and the people who depend on language services may not receive the level of care they deserve. No matter who organizations decide to hire to take care of translation and interpretation needs, they must be sure that those people are qualified. Translation and interpretation are practice professions, and professional providers need to have adequate training, ongoing experience, and regular professional development opportunities in order to adequately serve in these roles. Now that we've covered who should provide language access services, we also need to talk about who should not provide them. It is the responsibility of organizations to know that their providers are capable in order to comply with legal requirements surrounding language access services. Sometimes a client or customer will bring a family member or a friend to help interpret. The organization should let the client know that their friend or family member can stay for the meeting or appointment if the client wishes, but that the organization will also engage a qualified interpreter. Employees should never require or encourage a client to bring their own interpreter. Children and minors should not be asked to provide interpretation services. They are not qualified professionals, and furthermore, some of the content of meetings may not be appropriate for them to hear, let alone interpret.
Test your knowledge. Which of the following are qualified interpreters?